Amberly Nelson here, excited about our upcoming conference, Hope for Heaven, on September 18th. And I'm really excited that I'll have my son with us that day. James Nelson here. He's got a lot of great information, what's happening among college-age kids everywhere, what's happening on the universities, this woke movement.
It's hard not to notice the increasingly secular and woke culture that is going on today. Ultimately, we have to fight for the culture of this country. And right now, the culture of this country is a sickening culture. And we are on the brink of losing the greatest country in the history of humanity. I believe that my generation can be the greatest generation in American history, or we can lose this country. We are going to ultimately win and triumph.
So that's what we're going to be talking about. Be sure and join us. That's September 18th, Hope for Heaven. It's going to be phenomenal.
I'm like Michael. We hold our mission presidents to be like saints. My mission president like Isaiah. And so I told him, I says, listen, let me teach Germans in Germany. You send me to Italy, let me teach Italians in Italy. And so President Benson transferred me from the Frankfurt mission to the brand new Italian mission. And there's another story there for another time. But so then my wife and I served in the Frankfurt mission as senior missionaries. Any of you here served as senior missionaries with your spouses? Well, here's the deal. It's harder on the sisters to be yanked out of the nest. It's harder on them. So a lot of us had our wives over there, and they thought, oh, you're just going to go back and relive your youth. Well, it's hard, but it was fantastic. And I have another story to tell about that sometime, about a woman I baptized in Germany, which you can see on the KSL TV YouTube on Saints in Europe, Faith, Hope, and Charity, which was filmed in summer of 2016. And that's another story. All right. I wrote a book. It's called The Invitation to the Shining City, but it's a novel. We call it Christian fantasy. It's for the wide Christian audience, not just LDS. But it's basically, how do you get it's easier to get the medicine go down with a spoonful of sugar. And so I've got doctrines and concepts in the book, kind of like, well, I'm not C.S. Lewis, but Narnia, where we learn about the Savior and his role through a fantasy. And so that's kind of what you'll find. And I only had 2 books left, and I left them on the kitchen table, but I am getting a whole case of them, but my books are available on Amazon right now, so both in paperback and ebook. But I'm not here to hawk books. I'm here to tell you about the message of the book.
Tell them the website.
My website is www.theshiningscity.org. The title of the book is The Invitation to the Shining City. So if you want to read a book or watch a movie about the end times, there's no shortages of apocalyptic stories featuring cataclysms caused by global warming or zombies on the march or alien invasion. But that's not even necessary. Just watch CNN or Fox News if you want to see all the bad news that's happening out there, because darkness is everywhere. In fact, we were just in Seattle with our oldest son a couple weeks ago, and he had his brother-in-law came to visit, and he had been in Portland. And he says, if you think Seattle's bad, you go to Portland, where 60% of the businesses are shuttered.
Biden wants to do another shutdown of the entire country.
Well, can I just I was listening to the Ice Age farmer, and he said something about the food shortages and that it will start in rural areas before it gets to the cities. I was up visiting friends up in Burley, and they're already running out of cases of water and gas stations without gas.
So, we're going to talk about the darkest hour. Specifically, last night, I dragged Michael's mission president, Don Gull, over, and we sat down and watched The Darkest Hour. Who has seen The Darkest Hour?
Is it on Amazon or?
Yeah, you can get it on Prime. You can get it on Amazon Prime. I'm going to give you Colette, may I ask you a question?
Yeah,
May I give these sweet ladies an assignment?
sure.
Okay. What is it about? It's about the beginnings of the Battle of Britain, when the English, the British Army was being surrounded on Dunkirk, and they.
Churchill.
It's the story about Churchill. We watch it again, and this is a crier movie, but I'll talk in a minute about who I think America's Churchill is. But I'll do that at the very end, and you can chime in. Gary Oldman, who portrayed Churchill, won the Best Actor Award in 2018, and it's an incredible story. I think we've had two portrayals like that, his and the one that Daniel Day-Lewis did of Lincoln in the Lincoln movie. That was also, it's of that same caliber. So here's the assignment. Get Dunkirk, The King's Speech, and Darkest Hour, and watch them with your family. Because I think, I heard you talking about this earlier. Why don't people get it? Why is there so much moral blindness out there? Why can't people tell right from wrong? We have a senator who can't tell right from wrong. We won't mention his name. My point is, there is a lot to learn. I just finished reading this book called The Splendid and the Vile. I have a couple of Churchill books, and I have another one that talks about, not warlord, well, it talks about Churchill at war. He started in the Boer Wars, then he was in World War I. He was Undersecretary of the Navy, and then, of course, he is appointed in May 25th, 1940, to be the Prime Minister after Neville Chamberlain is booted out. And in this book, there's a phrase that I think applies to us today. An effort must be made to shake off the mental and mortal prostration to the will and initiative of the enemy from which we suffer. We were just talking about that, about people walking around with masks on all the time. I saw people in their car with their windows closed with masks on. I wanted to stop and pull the mask off and slap them silly.
Yes.
So
I saw a guy riding his bike the other day with a mask on. I'm like, air's free.
well, here's the thing. It's virtue signaling.
Yes.
It's virtue signaling. I care about more. I'm more righteous than you. And by the way, I voted Democrat. But let's not talk about politics. Okay. I won't say the D word again. I promise. And if you've seen the movie, The King's Speech, that is a wonderful movie. If you watch, to get an idea of, you should probably watch the Churchill Darkest Hour before you see King's Speech, because then you get an appreciation for King George VI. After Churchill gave his rousing talk, which I will just give you some pieces of, this was right at the time that they had begun the evacuation from Dunkirk. He gets somebody, he says, "Wars are not won by evacuation." And then, as Larson says, he fires his boilers and he says, "We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and the oceans. We'll fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island. Whatever the cost may be, we shall fight in the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and on the streets. And we'll fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." And then talking to a colleague.
German and Irish.
It's a little German and Irish and English all mixed together. And then he whispered to a guy next to him and he says, "And we will fight them with the butt end of broken bottles, because that's bloody well all we've got." So they had a darkest hour. And sisters, I would like to propose and state, I think we are in a darkest hour. I don't know if we're in May 1940 or if in April 1940, but we are approaching the darkest hour, and that's my worry. How dark is it going to get? This particular speech was part of the King's Speech that he delivered from the palace after he'd been coached by the speech coach. And he said, "I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, Give me light that I may tread safely into the unknown. And he replied, Go ye out into the darkness and put your hand in the hand of God. That shall be to you better than a light and safer than the known way. As I mentioned, I have some podcasts at latterdayradio.com. And the one that you can go look at and read is the one with Randall Chase. You can find it under book reviews. He's an author from St. George. And so I put this to him during this talk. And he's a very serious guy. He's not as jocular as me, but very well schooled. And I said, so, Brother Chase, Dr. Chase, when is the Lord coming? And it was obviously a joke, but he didn't quite catch the humor of it. And he says, we don't know. But I said, but he says, what we need to understand, and I'll get to this in a minute, it's a difference between a great day and a dreadful day. So my little book is basically light at the end of the tunnel. So there's all kinds of stories about Armageddon and all those kinds of things, but it's obvious to me that we need to take a look inside my particular book, and you can see what's there. I'm jumping ahead of myself here a little bit. So in my book, we take a journey back to 1925 and a return to normalcy where Calvin Coolidge is president and life was simpler. Talking about life being simpler, you know. And the story begins actually at Caesarea, underneath the stones here. So I don't know, can they hear this? How loud do I need to make this?
The Invitation, Chapter 1, Scene 1, read by the author, GM Jarrard.
Can you hear that?
Jonathan Bloom put his shoes and socks back on. Waiting in the Mediterranean would be more enjoyable if you didn't have to roll up the cuffs on your suit pants and weren't wearing a tie. This is such an odd place for a job interview, the 49-year-old lawyer said to no one in particular as he tied his shoes. He was sitting on history, a block of sandstone, a fragment of the Roman aqueduct at Caesarea, now officially part of the nation of Israel. It was approaching dusk. For nearly 10 years, all he had seen was chaos, war, and retribution. And for a brief moment, he had found peace. Peace right here on this beach, where Herod the Great had built the aqueduct, looming right over his head. He was a military attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv. Israel was now a state in its own right, already 2 years old. Jonathan Bloom was in the promised land. When he first set foot in Haifa a year ago, there was a moment when time stood still, a pause, no heavenly choirs, no parting of the sea, rather a calmness that quietly enveloped him. Israel knew him, it welcomed him. For a Jew, he was right where he belonged, or so he thought. Bloom turned at the sound of footsteps behind him. There was a man approaching. Was he the one? There was a vague familiarity in the man's eyes that transfixed him. Bright blue, even in the dusk, brighter than any he had ever seen. They were the color of the sea. Shalom Ken Malak, the man said. Sorry, I don't speak Hebrew, just some Yiddish. I'm Jonathan Bloom, he said. It's Aramaic. My name is John. Nice to meet you. They shook hands. His were the strong hands of a working man, hands with a history. John had long hair hidden under a headdress that could either be Arab or Israeli, hard to tell, and a full black beard. But his most distinguishing feature were the eyes. Bloom was a bit shorter and stockier than the stranger, but appeared taller, thanks to his halo of dark but receding curly hair. His infectious smile and the gleam in his eyes had served him well, first in courtrooms and in the halls of power, and then in the Army's Judge Advocate Corps. They seated themselves on facing blocks of stone. Bloom spoke first. I must say I've been intrigued by your request to meet me here in such an unconventional place. You're quite the man of mystery, John smiled. Yes, I've heard that before. Bloom opened his small leather attaché and pulled out a recently typewritten vita. He handed it to John. It's tuck and walk, John said. It's a beautiful day turning into a beautiful night. He looked over Jonathan's resume as they strode down the Strand. So you left the district attorney's office in January 1942 to join the army. And you learned German? Yes, my grandparents often spoke to me in Yiddish, so it wasn't a stretch to learn the language. Came in handy when I interrogated POWs after D-Day, Bloom explained. John handed the resume back to Bloom. The sun was getting lower in the sky and the tide was coming in. The sand was wet and there were now 2 long sets of footprints behind them. So what exactly are you looking for? What is the position you need filled? Bloom asked. Actually, Jonathan, we are creating a position specifically for you. We need you. As I said, we have been watching you ever since law school. We watched you in Germany, first at the camps, then at the Nuremberg trials, and finally the tribunal in Tokyo. Gruesome business, John said. Yes, gruesome, that's probably the right word. A stone tied around your leg would be another way to describe it. It's so hard to bear, hard to forget. What I experienced rarely leaves my thoughts. It's so unfathomable, so heavy. I'm still looking for ways to lose the stone, the burden, Bloom said with a sigh. Maybe we have a way. So here you are now, distancing yourself from Tokyo and the Third Reich. Maybe someday, distant memories, we hope. We were happy when we heard the new ambassador to Israel needed a military attaché, so we put in a good word for you. You earned your accolades. Who's we? We will get to that. John changed the subject. So you were in country when the Israelis finally sent the Arab armies packing, actually right in the middle of it. Is that right? John asked. Bloom nodded and John continued. Not married, no prospects? No, I'm a widower, but you probably already knew that. John stopped near a large piece of driftwood that appeared to be part of a boat. He looked around, saw that they were alone, then pulled a valise out of his coat, held it for a moment, and then presented it to Bloom. This may come as a surprise, but Jonathan, we are extending you an offer right now. As you will see, it's more than just a job. It has benefits, a generous retirement, and more than a lifetime of service. And also in there is a list of names, a very long list, along with instructions. It provides details about the invitation. The invitation? Bloom asked. Yes, in the envelope. It is our offer and our expectations. If you accept it, be at the Caesarea port Saturday night after Shabbat. Bring your duffel, your suitcases, everything. We'll leave it dark. We're taking a boat ride, and I'll be there to welcome you aboard. Go ahead, you can open it now, John said. The envelope looked ancient, was crafted out of handmade paper and closed tightly with a large wax seal. Jonathan put the other documents, a packet of names and instructions, into his attaché case and set it all down on the sand between his feet. Now he was focused on the gift he had just been given. The sun had just set, but there was still enough light to read the invitation. He ran a finger along the envelope, turned it over, hoping for a clue about the contents. He was tentative, treating it like the Nag Hammadi papyri. He carefully broke the seal and opened it. When he read what was inside, he felt cemented in the sand, immovable. Is this possible? He turned to the stranger for an explanation, but he was gone, vanished. Jonathan Bloom stared at the footprints in the sand. 2 sets led back to the aqueduct where they had first met, but there were no footprints leading away. Where did he go? Then and there, Jonathan Bloom decided to accept his new position.
I really hate that guy's voice. Basically, we meet Jonathan Bloom in the beginning, and he gets an assignment. He gets his own invitation to help others get their invitation, and that's what the book's about. In fact, the big question that we have in the book that I'm putting to people who read it is, what would you sacrifice to escape to the shining city on the hill, where the residents are of one mind, one one heart, one mind, dwell in righteousness, and care for the poor, what would you give to go there? That's the question that the book asks, but we're not going to quite get into that because I told you what I really want to do is talk about the story behind the story and what I learned along the way. What you'll find not only quotes from President Calvin Coolidge, but he resurrected him, brought him back to life. And you can do that in fantasies, and I did that in this. So, but you also get wisdom from C.S. Lewis, John Winthrop, and others, and scriptures. And how did this start? What got me going on this? Well, I think for the same reason that we've already talked about, we live in two Americas, don't we? With polar opposite visions of the future. Now, I just showed you about that one movie that I was watching, but look what Hollywood turns out most of the time. It's hard to find movies about utopia, utopian visions. It's utopia versus dystopia. So we've got Narnia and my favorite movie, The Field of Dreams. But at the same time, we just watched The Second Quiet Place with one of our kids, and then there's Breach about rebellions on a spacecraft leaving the Earth because it's been environmentally damaged, or the same thing with Mel Gibson and his Mad Max shows, and then Contagion. We know all about Contagion. They did the movie first, and then life imitated it. So what got me started was last year I had been distressed, as you probably were, about all the things that were happening around the world. There were not just wars and rumors of wars. There was burning cities, everything about the whole COVID fiasco. At first, I decided at some point that I couldn't watch it anymore. I couldn't watch Netflix. I got rid of Netflix. We disconnected DirecTV, and I began watching The Chosen. What I discovered from watching The Chosen is there are a lot of things that have been missing that they're trying to strip away our culture. And Nancy, could you get me a drink of water? I'm dry. Thank you. Nancy's the best.
No, she's the best. She just gave her cold water.
Oh, thank you very much. Why did I stage my book in 1920? Well, the book is a contemporary book, but to find the city, you have to go to 1925. And I think if we look back where we were, I'm obviously the oldest person in here, and we're not going to share birthdays, but I'm older than all of you. I remember I spent first grade at Blaine School on 33rd South and 23rd East, which is now a McDonald's. My house and the grocery store that was next door is now a Jiffy Lube. Across the street where our church was is a paper store. It's right in the middle of South Salt Lake. Not a great place to live right now, but that's where I grew up. And I remember, that's me. Can you tell that's a picture of me? No, it's not. We used to do the Pledge of Allegiance just like you did here today. And I was missing the fact that we're not one nation, not under God. We're not indivisible, we're divisible. And is there liberty and justice for all? I don't think so. And so that's what prompted me to start writing. So after I binge watched The Chosen, I began binge writing my book. I don't know how many we're going to talk about writing books when we're done at the end of this, because I believe everybody should not leave this earth without leaving their story and their testimony behind. And as I was writing this book, it was exciting to go downstairs in the morning. So what is going to happen to Jonathan Bloom? You know, what's going to happen to him? We understand, being members of the church and lovers of liberty, that there are a lot of people who still look to this country, and that's a picture from just last week, and that's kind of what got me started. I was angry and I wanted a way out. And what you'll discover if you happen to read the book is that yes, we have places that we would like to leave sometimes and go some other place. Maybe we're not supposed to leave. Nevertheless, the book is an allegory about a place, a mythical city of light. And what's interesting is these places that I'm going to list on here, and you'll see them come up: Avalon, Arcadia, Cocaina, Lemuria. These are magic cities that are legends all over the world in cultures from Ireland to India. Avalon, for example, talks about the possibility of Arthur's return, kind of like the Second Coming. There's a poem by William of Malmesbury in 1125 where he says, "But Arthur's grave is nowhere seen, where antiquity of fable still claims that he will return." Paititi is a city of gold in South America, in Peru, as a matter of fact. Leonesse is supposed to be a kingdom, according to legend, consisted of a long strand of land stretching from the Land's End at the northwestern tip of Cornwall, England, to what is now the Isles of Scilly in the Celtic Sea. All of these are legends that take us back to the shining city, and in this case, the shining city on the hill. What is the source of the shining city on the hill? I'm sure you've talked about this before. That is John Winthrop. But he obviously takes his vision for the shining city from Matthew chapter 5, where the Lord says, "You're the light of the world. A city that is built on a hill cannot be hid." I don't know how familiar you are with John Winthrop. Probably this group you probably are. But he's the Puritan leader that headed up a armada of 11 ships who decided to move to the New World and create a Puritan settlement in New England. This was 10 years after Plymouth, so it's in 1630. And on the way in the ship Arabella, he gave a speech, coined the phrase "the shining city on the hill," that's been handed down from then until now, all the way down to when Ronald Reagan talked about it in 1980. It eventually became Boston, which fell short of his expectations. And its failure to measure up was what John Bunyan alluded to in his epic poem, Pilgrim's Progress. Here's just a glimpse of what Winthrop said. "We must delight in each other. We make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work, as members of the same body, to provide for our posterity, to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God." People could probably say, well, Joseph Smith picked up all these things and he just elaborated it. I would rather say the source that Joseph Smith had about the New Jerusalem came from the same, Winthrop got it from the same source.
This was in what year?
1630. So there were they figure 750 to 1,000 people on these 11 ships. Can you imagine? They arrived and they searched around until finally they found the harbor of Boston and decided that was the place to stay. They had water and all those things necessary for life. And while Boston didn't become the city of Enoch, the spiritual legacy did take root. The founders, far from the deists described by revisionist historians, clearly understood that Christ was the cornerstone and biblical truth about the foundation of our constitutional republic. You can find this speech. In fact, what I will do, I will send to Colette some documents that she can pass on to you. One is John Winthrop's Dreams of a City on the Hill. You can find it on, obviously on Wikipedia and other places, but why look for it when I already have it? So, Colette, I will send that to you, and you can share it with your people here. John Winthrop, when he has his dream of a city, imagine this: he's giving the speech on the good ship Arabella, somewhere on the Atlantic Ocean. I don't know how, in the middle of the ocean, it was a nice day or a Sunday or whenever it was, but he says, why are we doing this? And he said, we need a model thereof. God Almighty in his most holy and wise providence hath so disposed of the condition of mankind as in all times some must be rich and some poor, some high and eminent in power and dignity, others mean and in subjection. He's talking about one heart, one mind, dwelling in righteousness with no poor among them. And he said, first, why? He said, first, to hold conformity with the rest of the world, being delighted to show forth the glory of his wisdom in the variety and difference of his creatures, the glory of his power in ordering all these differences for the preservation and goodwill of the whole, and the glory of his greatness, that is, the glory of princes to have many officers. So this great king will have many stewards, counting himself more honored in dispensing his gifts to man by man than if he did it by his own immediate hands. There we're talking about stewardship, aren't we? And he says, here's the second reason. He said, the second reason that we are establishing our own city on the hill is that God might have more occasion to manifest the work of his Spirit, first upon the wicked in moderating and restraining them, so that the rich and mighty should not eat up the poor or grind their faces, as we read about in the Doctrine and Covenants, nor the poor and despised rise up and against and shake off their yoke. That's the same thing we read in the Doctrine and Covenants, isn't it? He said, the third reason, he says that every man might have need of others, and from hence they might be all knit more nearly together in the bonds of brotherly affection. That's what ministering is all about, isn't it? From hence it appears plainly that no man is made more honorable than any other or more wealthy, etc., out of any particular and singular respect to himself, but for the glory of his Creator and the common good of the creature man. We have, obviously in church history, we know how difficult this is. We could do a whole nother presentation on Orderville. And I have been to Orderville, and it doesn't look like the city of Enoch or anything close to it. I'm sure that we'll be studying it this year, since we're studying the Doctrine and Covenants in church history. But we need to remember about the city of Enoch is it took them 365 years to build a city good enough the Lord would take it up into the air. A couple more things, I'll just go fast so that I don't bore you, but he says, thus stands the cause between God and us. We are entered into a covenant with him for his work. We have taken out a commission. We have hereupon besought him of favor and blessing. Now, if the Lord shall please to hear us and bring us in peace in the place that we desire, then hath he ratified this covenant and sealed our commission. We will expect a strict performance of the articles contained in it. But if we neglect the observation of these articles, the Lord will surely break out in wrath against us. Be avenged of such a people, and now make us know the price of the breach of such a covenant. And then this is the part that we talk about quite a bit, and it's in the book. Not only to avoid this shipwreck, they were on ships, remember, when he gave this talk, and to provide for our posterity is to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with God. And for this end we must be knit together in this work as one man. I had an interesting experience earlier this year. As I was finishing my book, I was still watching things on television, and if I watch it, I would get angry. When I get angry, the Spirit goes, I'm leaving now. And so I had a prayer. I says, Lord, help me be more tolerant. I'm opinionated. I'm not meek. I'm intolerant. And I was not happy with myself. I needed the Lord's help to finish my book. And so I said, help me learn this lesson. And what I do now that I'm sort of half retired is I edit, paginate, and publish personal and family histories for people. I brought some over there if you want to look at them. And I get a call from my friend Mark Hancock at Family Heritage Publishers. And he says, hey, I've got someone that called me, they need someone to help them do their book. And I says, fantastic. This was in January, February. So I met her in March and started on her book. I finished it in May. And when I went to her house, there on the front lawn was a Black Lives Matter sign. There was a Biden sign in the window. There was that one thing about Black Lives Matter, it's about 12 lines long, how much more they are righteous than we are. I said, oh, geez. And I go inside and I meet this older lady, the same age as me, went to Germany on a mission. She comes from a very famous Utah family, and she's And so I was kidding her. I says, well, it's kind of good that a conservative gets to meet a liberal. Oh, I'm not a liberal. You're not? No, I'm a progressive. And I thought, even worse. And then in the meantime, this woman has adopted 10 kids. Her husband left her after she started this. They couldn't have kids of their own. If I tell you too much, you might figure out who she is. But they're all mixed races, Koreans, blacks, mixed race people. A young woman from Jordan. And she is living the gospel, even though her politics are a little screwy. And at that point, I learned the importance of being tolerant. Years ago, when I was on my mission in Italy, towards the end of my mission, I was a district leader in the city of Bari, down on the heel of Italy. And we got 2 new missionaries. We put them in a little city called Brindisi, which is down farther south. And we were in Bari, which is a bigger city. We had no members in Bari. We didn't hold church meetings. We didn't have a building. We just tracked it all day. So we'd go down to Brindisi. They did have a little, about 3 people down there, American Air Force. And so they had a little branch. We were down there for Thanksgiving, 1966. And this other elder is a brand new elder out of the States. He had spent a year at BYU. He was a convert to the church, Italian-American, and he had been studying under Hiram Andrus, BYU religion professor. I got some of his books. I took a class from him later and went to BYU. And he was brilliant. I'd never read the Doctrine and Covenants. He knew it frontwards and backwards. And we were talking about some things way into the night, till 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. I thought the darkness in the room would break open and light would pour down. A column of light would come down. Now fast forward about 40 years. He's left the church. And one of it's because he knew more than the brethren did. He thought women, his wife was very much a hyper-feminist, but he said, there's a song that we need to look at. We need to look up. And he had a copy of it, an old songbook. It says, oh, in the outward church below, the wheat and tares together grow. I had a copy of it. If you go put that in the internet, you can find it. And it's about the wheat and tares are growing together. And I think the lesson that I learned from this lady is don't just assume you're the wheat. You might be the tares. And so obviously the parable of the wheat and the tares is you can't tear the tares out while the wheat is still growing. The separation won't occur until the wheat is ripe and ready for harvest. And that's what I learned from Randall Chase in his book. He has a book on the apocalypse in modern times. I would suggest you take a look at his book too. Because I asked him the question, don't you think the world is bad enough right now that the Lord could come? He says, oh, the world's plenty bad enough. That's not the problem. We're not good enough. When is the Lord going to come? I think, well, I better get myself ready, because the sooner I'm ready, everybody else is ready, the sooner he can come. So I need to move on here. Let's fast forward a couple of 100 years. John Adams. And this is really the focus of the book, is that our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. You know that. I'm sure you have it all memorized. Just a comment here, because I want you to kind of get involved. I'd like you to comment on that. If you were to explain that to someone else in Sunday school class, what would your answer be? Sister, yes.
Well, as I say, a society is based on law. God is based on law. And Benjamin Franklin had written his last thing on what religion was, his creed on religion, and it says religion is based on having the answers to a God. So if you're going to have a moral and a religious people that will obey law, those who do not obey law are in the prison because they can't obey law. And those who obey law usually worship, at least they keep the 10 Commandments, because those are the basics of the law. So you have to have a moral and a religious people to keep a constitution, to keep law.
That's right. In fact, that's what we want to talk about our next character in the book. And Colette was told me that she had heard the Glenn Beck talk on Calvin Coolidge.
Calvin Coolidge.
And what's interesting is I kind of remembered that Calvin Coolidge was a president in 1925 because he was preceded by Warren G. Harding, who died in office in 23, and Coolidge took his place and then reelected in 24. But I didn't know all the details about Calvin Coolidge. So let me tell a little bit about character development in my book, because if you all write books, everybody here has a book inside of them. That's the one thing I want you to let you realize. You have a book inside of you. I've been trying to tell my dear friend and neighbor, Don Gall. He had an incredible life, and he thinks, well, people just think I'm bragging. Well, yeah, you have a lot to brag about, Don. Write your story and share it with people. But in my particular case, discovered Jonathan Bloom is the character we heard the little audio on. He wasn't in the first of the book when I first wrote my first draft. There's three main drafts. He didn't show up until page 70. But all of a sudden, as I described Jonathan Bloom, he comes to life. And I love Jonathan Bloom. I says, why are you hiding Jonathan Bloom cleared on chapter 71? He ought to be on page 1. So I brought Jonathan Bloom up, that whole thing of the Caesarea and the visit with that's John the Beloved, by the way, if you didn't quite figure that out. In the beginning, is that I hear voices. So I go on writing my book, and I think, what's going to happen with? Oh, this is happening. And then I did the research on Calvin Coolidge, and lo and behold, I found my new hero, my favorite president. And
You've heard of the Roaring Twenties?
why is it that it roared? It's because of that man.
That man.
Just like we roared from 2017 until 2020, is because of people understand the fact that we need to have our freedom. Who would like to read that for us? Because I have to turn sideways.
President Calvin Coolidge makes a cameo appearance in the invitation
Talk louder, please.
where we learn about this speech that he delivered in September 1924. Government cannot supply the source and motive for the complete reformation of society. Government rests on religion, the claim to the right to freedom, the claim to the right to equality, with the resultant right to self-government. The rule of the people have no foundation other than the common brotherhood of man derived from the common fatherhood of God. If this faith is set aside, the foundations of our institutions fail. The citizen is deposed from the high estate which he holds as amenable to a universal conscience. Society reverts to a system of class and caste, and the government, instead of being imposed by reason from within, is imposed by force from without. Freedom and democracy would give way to despotism and slavery. I do not know of any adequate support for our form of government except that which comes from religion.
Does that sound like what's happening today? That's exactly what's happening today.
Remember de Tocqueville came and toured the United States?
Yes, Alexis de Tocqueville. Yep.
Well,
He said America is in its churches.
America's great because America is good.
If it ceases to be good, it will cease to be great.
Yes.
With religion.
That was Alexis de Tocqueville.
yes.
Yeah, Alexis said that.
With religion, you have an absolute, and if you don't have an absolute, everything's relative.
That's exactly right. I have this story that I tell people about two old men sitting on a porch, whittling. And the grandson goes up to the one man, Grandpa, what you and Uncle George doing here? Whittling. What you making? Chips. And I think that's what happens with a lot of intellectuals outside of the church and inside the church, where they said, well, I'm not sure the Nephites were really in the they were, we don't have evidence for that, so let's just say they were in Mesoamerica. I'm just using my own prejudice to illustrate something. But the point is, it's easy to whittle, unless you actually have that solid foundation of faith and being immovable. And that's, by the way, that's another thing why you want to see The Darkest Hour, because that movie is about courage. That movie is about courage, and the courage that Churchill was the only man there. And there was a, see if, when you watch that movie, if Lord Halifax reminds you of any sitting senators we have in Utah right now. But you have to watch the movie first. So I'm not going to be no spoiler alerts. I think Coolidge actually gave us a prophecy. If this faith is set aside, the foundations of our institutions fail, the citizen is deposed from the high estate which he holds as amenable to a universal conscience, society diverts to a system of class and caste, and the government, instead of being imposed by reason from within, is imposed by force from without, then freedom and democracy would give way to despotism and slavery. You never want to push that button too many times. Now, do we have a book of scripture that kind of tells this very same thing? If I look back to my time in Blaine School when I was in first grade and learned the Pledge of Allegiance, it was during the Korean War, by the way. America has declined in righteousness at a very rapid rate, year after year, until 70 years from now, right up until now, here we are. And who would like to read in Moroni's voice this scripture? I mean, you'll probably all have it memorized.
What does he sound like?
Kind of like that with the accent. I don't know. Why don't you do your best? Colette, why don't you read this for us? You have a good, loud voice.
Oh, my beloved son, how can a people like this that are without civilization? And only a few years have passed away, and they were a civil and a delightsome people. But, oh, my son, how can a people like this, whose delight is in so much abomination, how can we expect that God will stay his hand in judgment against us? Behold, my heart cries, woe unto this people! Come out in judgment, O God, and hide their sins and wickedness and abominations from before thy face.
If that's not scripture, where did it come from? I have thought many times about the very last time Moroni was adding his postscript. He had the cement box built, and in the cave and wherever he had all of these records, and it was his last entry. And if you notice in the Book of Mormon, he comes back a second time. He says, "Oh, I'm not dead yet, so I'm going to add a few more things to the Book of Mormon." This is another indication of the fact that the book was not fabricated out of whole cloth by the imaginations of Joseph Smith. By the way, I watch, whenever I can, Elder Holland's 2009 speech on the Safe Way. What's it called? 2009 conference talk. It's about the safe way. That's all I can remember right now. But think about do you think one of the reasons that I think the plates are made out of gold is that they so wouldn't rust from the tears of these brethren that said this. Behold, I speak unto you as though I spake from the dead. For I know that ye shall have my words. Condemn me not because of mine imperfections, neither my Father because of his imperfections, neither them who have written before him, but rather give thanks unto God that he hath made manifest unto you our imperfections, that ye may learn to be more wise than we have been. He was weeping when he put this on the plates. It's like he's saying, "You knuckleheads, wake up." Then, who would like to read this? This is, now we get it. Now we're talking about light. Up until now, we're talking about darkness. I told you my book is about going through seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Who would like to read this one from Ether. Would you like to read that?
Wherefore the remnant of the house of Joseph shall be built upon this land, and it shall be a land of their inheritance. And they shall build up a holy city unto the Lord, like unto the Jerusalem of old. And they shall no more be confounded until the end come, when the earth shall pass away, and there shall be a new heaven and a new earth, and they shall be like unto the old, save the old have passed away, and all things have become new. Then cometh the new Jerusalem, and blessed are they who dwell therein, for it is they whose garments are white through the blood of the Lamb, and they are they who are numbered among the remnant of the seed of Joseph, who were of the house of Israel.
Thank you very much.
Can I just tell you?
You bet, please.
The Elder Holland talk, is it Safety for the Soul?
Safety for the Soul.
Okay, October 2009.
I've watched that 50 times, and I cry every time. I'm a crier. So was Winston Churchill, by the way. So, but there is hope, obviously. Zion is fled, and as I mentioned earlier, 360. When you live to be 600 or 700 years old,
Wasn't he close to 1,000?
they were all. He took the whole city. The Lord took the whole city, and
So I equate it as a third of his life, or maybe half his life. It took him half his life to get to that. So.
Yeah, it's kind of unfair.
well, some of us in here are past half of life. That's me. I've been reading going back. I have to confess this. I have never read the Old Testament from beginning to end, and I've decided I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it now, and I have it both in English and German. I have a Martin Luther Bible that I bought, and this is an interesting observation. German is the language of my testimony. I say that because I had a testimony before I went on my mission, but it became engraven on my heart when I was a missionary. And I read the Book of Mormon all the way through the first time in German. I had read it before, it's like the bullet that tried to kill Willard Richards stopped with a pocket watch, and I think sometimes it wasn't a pocket watch. He had a copy of the Book of Mormon in his pocket, and the bullet stopped at 2nd Nephi. And I think we get into the Isaiah part of the Book of Mormon, and we don't keep going because we don't understand Isaiah. But this, I think, is hopeful. And all the days of Zion and the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch and all his people walked with God, and he dwelt in the midst of Zion. And it came to pass that Zion was not, for God received it up into his own bosom, and from hence went forth the saying, Zion is fled. We believe it's coming back, don't we? So my question to you is, are you waiting for an invitation? My book, of course, is about faith, freedom, and the sacrifice in a time of chaos, and making that sacrifice. I'll just give you this real quickly. As I say, I don't want to go too long, but I don't want to bore you either. But I don't want to waste your time by finishing early and have Colette mad at me. So I'll talk a little bit about the characters. I already told you about Jonathan. As I said, he came to life in the book after I'd written about 100 or 200 pages when I thought, I need a new opening, so I went back. I love Jonathan. And he obviously was there to help people like Joey Kuntz and Dana, his wife, get their invitation and find their way to the Shining City. So nothing was going to stop Joey Kuntz from getting the multi-million-dollar payday due him from the tech company he helped start, except perhaps his grandmother. All she wanted was a weekend of his time to move her to a spa retreat in the mountains. It was simple enough. But when he and his wife Dana follow a hand-drawn map to take the old woman to a place no one had ever heard of, suddenly it's 1925 and Calvin Coolidge is president. Instead of the chaos and corruption of today, they find a small-town paradise with healing waters, no crime, no sickness, no death. But to stay, they require an invitation. They need one of their own. And to earn it, they need to gather others in the community that's of one heart and one mind, lives in harmony and cares for the poor. we all know, since we take time out of our time being ministers, that's not always, it's easier said than done. It wasn't so much the suspicions cast at him, comments by the media comparing him with cult leader Jim Jones or David Koresh, accusations of embezzlement or even a kidnapping that would stop him. Rather, it was whether he'd keep his $12 million payout or accept an invitation to the shining city on the hill. The question is, what would we do? I think many times about, if you've seen the Bible videos about the young prince that comes to the Lord, Lord, what can I do to gain eternal life? Sell all the house and give it to the poor and come follow me. And he went away sorrowful, for he was rich. And if you go back and look at the story of Orderville, they started out, they were all extremely poor when they started Orderville. But they built up this little city, and they had everything in common. It was probably not how the city of Enoch was organized, but it was the saints' vision in those days, since they came down there with nothing, how they could survive down in that area. It's right down where my mother's family came from, down by Bryce Canyon, between Bryce Canyon and Cannonville, down in that area. But it was a boy who wore out his pants, wanted to get another pair, was saving the wool tails from the sheep that they were docking, and took it into the neighboring town, Panguitch, bought him a new pair of pants. Now everybody wanted a pair of pants like that. And it's the envy. Well, Joey's got that pair of pants. Why can't I get a pair of pants like that? Well, it's just because you need to wear these we make for you. And so it's a hard thing to not compare yourself to others. In fact, let me just read you a little bit out of the book that talks about this comparison. One of the obstacles that Joey Kuntz and his wife Dana had was not just the obstacles that were thrown in the way. They have a lot of obstacles. I'll just read a couple of things. So Jonathan, if you remember my picture from the beginning with the train going up the mountain that we had on the screen, well, that's actually in the book. And in this particular case, Joey, there's a trainload of pilgrims on the way back from going to the shining city. Joey is is in one of the train cars in the back, and I don't want to be a spoiler alert, but one of his chief opponent has seen the light and is now, he understands what Joey was doing, and he was in the sheriff's department, was going to find out what happened to his grandmother. And so Jonathan goes back. Jonathan goes back to find Joey. He says, Joey looked at him, smiled, and continued gazing out the window. He said nothing. For a long moment, Jonathan joined in the silence. Finally, he spoke. Joey, you okay? Joey nodded, still silent as the Sphinx. Jonathan paused, then leaned forward and asked him very softly, something on your mind? Oh, this and that. Jonathan waited. Finally, Joy sat back, closed the book he was reading, and sighed. You know, I was really confused about when Blazard came aboard the train today and proceeded up the canyon with us. Did he get an invitation? Well, he did see what all the rest of us saw, experienced what we witnessed, and witnessed what you've now witnessed twice. Why don't you think he should get one? Joy looked down out the window and looked again out the window and turned back to his mentor. I don't know what to say. So you have a problem having what you have, benefiting from a future life and a loftier sphere? Joey shrugged his shoulders. He says, ever hear of the parable of the householder and the laborers in the vineyard? Jonathan asked. And I think this all applies to us. I love this parable. It took me a long time to figure this out. Joey shrugged his shoulders. He says, no, it doesn't ring a bell, Joey said. Look it up. It's in Matthew chapter 20. Seems a master of the vineyard, a householder, as Matthew describes him, needed some help in the farm. So he goes to the marketplace, finds a few idlers standing around for work, and offers them a penny a day. I guess a penny bought a lot more in those days than it does today. In fact, the master said, whatever is right, I will give you. And Matthew records, and they went their way, But I suppose the workload was more than he expected, so he returned to the 3rd hour, the 6th hour, and the 9th hour, and hires even more. Even at the 11th hour, he finds others standing idle and asks them, "Why stand ye here idle all the day?" They respond, "Hey, nobody hired us." Finally, night falls, and the master asks the foreman to gather everybody and pay them their wages. If I recall correctly, in verse 9, he tells his foreman, "Pay everybody and send them off. Everybody gets a penny." So what do you think the men hired at 7 a.m. said? Well, you know what I'd say? So would most people. Matthew writes that they murmured against the good man of the house. They complained that the latecomers just worked for an hour and that they got the same wages as we did, and we were there all day long. Joy smiled and sat back in his seat. Then the boss reminds them that he didn't wrong them. They agreed to the terms when they started early that morning. And in Matthew's words, "Take that thine is, and go thy way. I will give unto thee this last, even as unto thee. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil, because I am good? So the last shall be called first, and the first last. For many be called, but few are chosen." Joy, let that sink in. And again, Jonathan waited. "It's about being of one heart and one mind, isn't it?" Now Jonathan smiled. "It's never easy, is it?" What keeps us from being of one heart and one mind? Are you always of one heart with your husbands? I'm sure you all are. Anybody that's not, raise your hand. That is, raise your hand. Even after 53 years of marriage, next month, for my wife, Christie, and me, we still have a hard time communicating. We see life through different lenses. Just like the lady whose book I did. She thought the church ought to be more charitable, and all the members of the church, she said, should have a Black Lives sign in their lawn. That's what she thinks. And you know what? She was the sweetest, loving person, and she'd given her whole life to raise these kids. And who am I to judge her? I'm not going to say I'm the wheat and you're the tare, because as she goes on to tell me about her life, sounds like I'm the tare and she's the wheat. So Dana and Joey are the Kuntzes who take the grandmother, Margaret Miller Kuntz, a 90-year-old retired German professor, there I'm sticking German all through this book, who simply won't give up on life and refuses to accept the inevitable. She's aging, but she's not going to give up. So when she meets a friend of hers who's been to this place, and she looks like she's 50, she wants to go get bathe in the stirring waters as well. Other characters that we have include Harlan Stone was actually on the Supreme Court, appointed by Calvin Close. I resurrected him as well. Walter Big Train Johnson, ball player for a pitcher for the Washington Senators. I resurrected him. Francine Gregory is a character pulled from the movie. Did anybody see the movie Gonzo, the Trial of America's Biggest Serial Killer? That's about the guy who had this abortion clinic. It's a true story, but they fictionalized it and did the story. Well, in my book, Francine Gregory is a nurse who turns him in. And then, of course, other characters. And Calvin Coolidge, good old Calvin, a largely forgotten man, but a champion for faith and freedom, who understood, as the founding fathers did, that the two are inextricably connected, as shown here. This whole idea of tolerance, the fundamental precept of liberty is toleration. If we can allow other people to have an opinion, then they for sure don't want us to express ours either. Another book I want to write is called Resurrecting John Stuart Mill. You all know who John Stuart Mill is? He was an English philosopher who actually was the father of utilitarianism. And for many years, it's the liberals during the 60s that pointed out that he was the one that said, don't infringe upon free speech. Now, we're the ones that are saying that. But he wrote his book, it's called On Liberty. And I want to write a book on why we need John Stuart Mill back. Because he says, if you have to remember, when you have an opinion and you're expressing it and you're in an argument with someone else, remember, you could always be wrong. And that's a lesson I learned from my neighbor and Michael's friend, Don Gull, I'm drying out here. He's a sealer in the temple. We live right by the Ochre Mountain Temple. Come out to our temple sometime. Would love to have you there. Make an appointment to come out. I don't know if they'd just let anybody come to the temple now. If you're not in that temple district, I don't know how that works. But by the way, I shaved off my beard and mustache just for you for this video, because if I came in looking like I did last week, you'd think I came in on a motorcycle. But well, here's the thing. I look older with it, but I look thinner. So, thinner or older? Thinner or older?
Well, I'd like to grow a beard if it makes me look thinner.
You get a job in the circus if you do that.
You had mentioned that you were going to tell us who you thought. Is it the modern day Calvin Coolidge is, or is that?
We're going to take a vote on it at the end.
Okay. I'll find out.
Consider for a moment why toleration is fundamental. I gave you my opinion. Any comments? Why is toleration so fundamental, and why is it so darn hard? Yeah.
I think I looked up the definition of it, and it actually is to accept what is needed for your growth. Is what tolerance is.
Oh, that is interesting. I have this big loose leaf, like this thick, of BYU talks and other talks. I found conference talks, and I have them all in there. And I've got one by a guy by the name of George Watts. He's a professor at BYU, and I think he was in my mission. He talks about man being created in God's image. And he talks about the fact that, why is man lesser than the dust of the earth? Because when God commands the dust, it obeys. And by being obedient is how we participate in our own creation to become like God. It's how we participate in our own creation. And I thought that was really interesting. What I was going to mention about Don Gull, since I went off on another ADHD tangent, is that Don, here he is, sealer in the temple, former mission president, a wise guy. Michael wants him to grab him and drag him here. And he'll probably come. But he said, the last month I've been working on being meek and lowly of heart. He says, you have to work on be meek and lowly of heart? What about me? I'm way less meek than you. And I think that's something I need to be learned. Who is the wheat and who are the tares? Well, I don't know that I can, I think the jury's still out. The wheat's not ripe. Because, sisters, the wheat's not ripe yet. The Lord won't come until the wheat's ripe. We need to get ripe so he can come. The world's plenty bad enough. And that's Randall Chase's book is great because it talks about that. Okay, now comes the embarrassing part. This is praise for the invitation, and this is what you put on the back of books. Bruce Huff is a dear friend. I was his bishop many years ago. He is the national committee man for the Utah Republican Party, represents us in Washington at the national convention and stuff. Two of his kids are Derek and Julianne Huff, the dancers. And Derek grew up with my youngest son. And he was one of the founders. He actually started Bonneville Satellite. When the church first started doing satellite broadcasts, Bruce did them. I was a bishop and I went to conference in 1980, and that was the first time we had President Hinckley was in New York. What's the name of the house where the house where the church was organized? 1830. Fayette. Name of the city, quick. Fayette, New York. Fayette. Okay, that's right. He was in Fayette, and Bruce put up that satellite. He was back there. He had a satellite in his yard, and we'd go over there and watch fights and things on it. Here's what Bruce said. He said, not since the Left Behind book series has a novel juxtaposed religiosity against a society that seems to have lost its way. The invitation takes us on a ride to a place that stirs our imagination and taps into a yearning that all people of faith share, just as James Hilton's Lost Horizon took us to Shangri-La. GM Jarrard's praise for the invitation takes us to the shining city on a hill during a time of contemporary cultural distress. Rob Bishop, who I did his paid media for his races. I've been up to his house. He had a stroke in December. He was out. His term ended in January, and he's got a book, 228,000 words of what his observations were from 18 years in Congress, and for 12 years in the Utah House of Representatives, where he was Speaker, and it's amazing. And we're going to bring you some. I want to go pick up Rob and bring him down here. I don't know, Michael and Nancy, should we tell them some of the secrets, things we're working on, or should we keep it a secret till we actually do it?
We got to let the cat out of the bag.
We're letting the cat out of the bag. Michael, and you can use this in your own YouTube. Michael and Nancy are amazing, and they can do so many things, and they do it for the love of the Lord. It's not because they want to get wealthy. I want to help them get wealthy so that they can do more things for the Lord. And so together we've got a number of websites, ventures that we're starting. One of the things we're going to have a website and a live streaming video portal where you can find everything you want to watch, and when it's live streamed, then you can watch it live and it will be there. We're going to, anytime anyone says, you can call Colette and say, Colette, here's something to give to Greg. I found this website. They need to put it on there. We're going to have it's almost like the Drudge Report. We can go to the Drudge Report and find everything about a topic, even though if you didn't produce it. It's called open source. Open source is the future. And if you share, the more you share, the better it is for everybody. And so we've got a lot of things we're going to be producing. One is a non-denominational site, and that's going to be, if you want to find anything, I'm going to have my podcasts on there. I have about 38 podcasts, and I'm going to put mine all up, and that's on latterdayradio.com. So they're Latter Day Media, I'm Latter Day Radio, and I've been working for a company called Latter Day Travel. So we're all kind of working together. So stay tuned for that. We'll let Colette know once things are happening. They're miracle workers.
We filmed somebody pretty cool yesterday, Bill, that came all dressed up.
Who's that?
And Ben Franklin.
Oh.
We're resurrecting people from dead left and right. This is what Rob Bishop said about my book. GM Jarrard has created multiple characters, each interesting, realistic, and empathetic. I constantly wanted to read just one more chapter to discover what happened in their lives. The invitation relates to our day with universal themes that compel the reader to reflect on the present, past, and future. It's a hopeful look at the world we find ourselves in today. And then my good friend Jerry Johnson, who worked with my dad. My dad's at the newspaper. He was a former church news editor. He retired in 1981, died in 2001. But about 1999, Jerry reminisced on all the old people that he missed, that he worked at the Deseret News. My dad was like a Mormon Walter Matthau, kind of like a J. Golden Kimball, if you know what I mean. And so Jerry wrote this article, and he said, one of the people I really missed and never got to see him before he left was my old friend Jack Jarrard. So my dad everyone's calling my mother, when did Jack die? He's sitting right here. Jerry Johnson said he was dead. So then Jerry had to write a retraction, which was really funny. And I was going to wheel my dad in his temple clothes, just all whites, in a wheelchair, putting up behind, and Jerry said, Jerry, I'm here. But, and then I was 7 years at the Deseret News on the weekends and nights while I was working for another company. But this is what Jerry said. Years ago, a Brazilian rabble-rouser named Paulo Coelho saw the light and started writing spiritual novels. His gift for mixing the supernatural world and natural world in startling ways would in time make him the best-selling author in the world. The author has chosen to mine a similar vein with his novel, The Invitation, and the story, a kind of mind-melding Pilgrim's Progress, would surely intrigue the great Coelho himself. So I hope you don't think your husband says, what did you do today? I went to almost a 2-hour commercial on this some guy's book. Oh. But my reason for coming here is to tell you about the message behind the book, not necessarily to sell the book. But you can buy it if you want to, and you can find it on Amazon. I have a book. I had a box of books ordered. I had 20, but they didn't arrive. So, but if they come and you want one quicker than waiting for Amazon, and this one's from Ingram, they're printing this. Let Colette know, and I'll help you out and give you a author's discount. But yeah, I'd like you to buy my book. But what I'd like you to do is to like my book. I have a Facebook page called GM Jarrard Author, and you can go there. I'm putting a bunch of things in there all the time. I'm adding a lot of backstory commentary about Calvin Coolidge and others, so that I wrote the book so I could get the medicine go down with a spoonful of sugar. The book does read fast, and as you go through it, it's like when you try to talk to a belligerent child, teach them the gospel, and they don't want to know them. So like Christ's parables, it's kind of like a parable. So that's what the book really promises people. Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath for them that love him. I think sometimes we can get so bogged down in the darkness around us and wring our hands. Churchill told us, don't focus on all of those negative things. Have courage. And that's the story of that book. So my wife said today, you're not going to talk to those ladies for 2 hours, are you? And I said, no, just an hour to an hour and 45 minutes. But
well, tell us.
Oh,
Calvin Coolidge.
No, not Calvin Coolidge.
No, Churchill.
America's Churchill is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go and watch that movie, Darkest Hour, they said the same things about Churchill that they say about Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. But history has proven that Churchill was right. And then you need to look at Lord Halifax, who is none other than Mitt Romney reincarnated, who wanted to negotiate with the Nazis. And you watch that book and you get angry just like Churchill was. Mm-hmm. You're going to want to say, let freedom ring. We want a country that's of one heart, one mind, dwells in righteousness, no power among us. We want to be undivided. So I don't.
Look at, in 6 months, how our country has deteriorated.
How much damage?
Damage.
It's amazing.
It's insane.
And look at what's happening that's even more.
I'm going to stand up and see if I can stand up now.
The unifying of those who just wearing a flag or red, white, and blue, like people are starting to gather more under the banner of liberty.
I know some people that know Dallas Jenkins and what happened with the church, and I don't know if you know this story or not, but a couple of people that were friends both with Dallas Jenkins, Tim Ballard and another gentleman who was serving as a senior missionary with his wife, were going to have dinner and have lunch and talk about how they were going to help Dallas Jenkins get more money.
Who's Dallas Jenkins?
The producer of The Chosen. And this other gentleman, and his name's Kent, I think so, said, let me call President Ballard, because he was working and doing some projects for President Ballard. So I called him up, and he says, did you happen to look at those videos I left for you, those DVDs about The Chosen? Oh, they're on my desk. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. But he said, take a look at them and see if there's maybe something the church could do to help them. And so he says, well, I'm meeting with President Nelson later this afternoon. So they had the meeting. About 4 o'clock, President Ballard called him back and said, you tell Dallas Jenkins he can use the Chosen set for free, and we'd like to buy exclusive broadcast rights for that on BYU TV. Of course, they're not exclusive, but they did get broadcast rights, and they're going to give him $15 million or something. But I believe in the convergence of truth. I mean, if you look at Glenn Beck. Now, I worked for Latter-day Traveler, actually cruise builder, and we had a big, there was supposed to have been a cruise last year with Glenn Beck to go to Israel with a whole bunch of people, including David Barton and Rabbi, what's the other guy, Rabbi's name? Lappin. Yeah. They're on that trip, but it got postponed till last October, then it got postponed to March, but it's happening this coming October. So they're actually going there. Glenn has done an amazing job of converging people of faith from different denominations. One broadcast that we did, Martin Tanner and I we were 7 months on the air at KLO. We did the Latter-day Radio every Friday from 10 to 1. We were competing with Rush, which made it hard, but so we were doing that. And one time I went and recorded Reverend, a Baptist minister from Independence who teaches out of the Book of Mormon.
Oh, yes.
You know who he is?
I do.
Lynn Riddenauer.
Riddenauer. So I had him, he was a wonderful man, and so we interviewed him. It was really bad audio. I haven't put it up as a podcast. Maybe I'll try to clean it up and put it up. And I said, well, how do you reconcile the Book of Mormon and Baptist teachings? So he says, well, a lot of people think I'm crazy. A lot of Baptists get mad at him for it. But he said, I read this thing, a statement that Joseph Smith said when he was asked by a Methodist minister, what is it that you actually believe? And he said, we believe that Jesus Christ was a literal Son of God, that he was born of a virgin mother, that he came to earth, that he organized a church, that he was crucified and died for our sins, and make it possible for all men to be resurrected. And he said, everything else are just appendages there too. And I think that's what President Nelson is doing for us, to realize a lot of that, whether it's Boy Scouts or whatever it is, we have too many appendages from the church, and we don't understand that Christ needs to be the focus. And if I would say one thing, I remember going to a conference session one day years ago, and there was one of these Baptist preachers from Nevada yelling epithets at us as we were going, and my wife thought I was going to go pummel him, and she had to go, you just keep your mouth shut. You know how wives do. You know what I'm saying? You know, do you ever give your husband the pirate eye?
No, my husband does that to me. Don't you say anything.
There's a pirate eye in my book, so that gives you another reason to buy it. There's a pirate eye in there. Then I met Lynn Riddenauer.
Did you say something to the guy?
Oh, Lynn Riddenauer. Oh, did I say anything to her? No, because her hand was over my mouth. My knees, I got a bad knee here. So what happened was, Lynn tells this story of how he moved to Independence from another place. He's a very visionary man. A man drops him a Book of Mormon. He says, read this. And he opens it up. He says, but this is Book of Mormon. And he opens it up. The guy had gone. He says, and he reads the first verse of 1 Nephi chapter 1. I, Nephi, have been born of goodly parents, therefore I make a record of my doings. He said, I knew from the moment I read that verse, this came from God. And this whole idea of appendages, we get so caught up in appendages. Oh, here's the point I was making about the preacher on the street. We should learn from the Baptists. I hope we can have Bruce Porter, when he comes to town, well, I'm working with him with Latter-day Travel. He's going to have some things that he'll be doing. He says, we need to understand as members of the church the difference between grace and mercy. They're not the same thing. The Baptists understand grace better than we do because we misapplied the term thinking grace also means mercy. No, it doesn't. Grace means universal resurrection for everybody, regardless of what they do. So when a Baptist says we're saved by grace, that means you're resurrected. Well, guess what? There's more. And I think that's the message we have. There's more.
Did you know that Lynn Riddenauer has seen Christ when he was burned over 90% of his body? He sent me the pictures. and he's all apologetic, like, I don't mean to gross you out, but this was very well documented in, with the doctors because they didn't know how I was healed. And you can't see the scars all over.
Well, here's the thing. You don't have to be a member of the church to have that experience. There's also a series of emails I get from one Israel, what's it called? What? One for Israel. And one of the fellows there works with another group that we hope to have a conference on, the Discovery Institute. And I've got some books, and I didn't bring those books. But my point is that truth converges, and people of goodwill need to recognize that if, as Christians and even as Jews, if we don't hang together, we will hang separately. And so I should probably end this officially with that. Yes?
So I've just been introduced to a couple of new thoughts. That when the missionaries' discussion started off with the restoration and Joseph Smith's story, the baptisms were off the chart. And that's when we had our great growth in the church. But then when they said, oh, well, we've attended your meetings and we never heard anyone talk about Christ, all we heard was Joseph Smith, then they came to that conclusion and said, you're right, we've got to make sure people understand that we're Christian. So then they changed the discussions, and it was Christ was the first discussions to make sure. So then baptisms went down. And so the premise, and I'm just throwing this out for discussion, but the premise was, if they see you as just another Christian denomination, there is no motivation to change. Because they have a Christian church that they attend, why do I change to go to a different Christian church? How do we teach Joseph Smith brought you the true understanding and truth of who Christ is, what the atonement really is, and answers to life's questions, because it gets watered down if we don't come out strong. This is who we are and why we are, and it is back to the restoration through Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. And then number two, there's a breakoff group that still believes in Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, and he thought his mission was to share the Book of Mormon, like with Lynn Ridenour, without joining the church. Their success rate is zippo, because it's not connected to the church. So there's something powerful about our church and the restoration through Joseph Smith.
I think there are three conference talks. Since I've been in the marketing and communications business, we talk about value propositions, and it has to do with branding. Basically, how are you different? How can you differentiate what you do and what it will do for me? Three conference talks, and it will tell everything you know about the church. I think the first one is Bruce R. McConkie's last address about that he'll know in coming days he'll see Christ and drench his feet with his tears. The one that you mentioned, you remember the title. See, I've got Safety for the Soul. Safety for the Soul by Elder Holland. And the third one is President Ballard's talk on 2018 about Joseph F. Smith's vision. I mean, if we look at what is in the first
2018?
2018. Yes, it was a fall. It was 100 years after the Joseph F. Smith, who was his grandfather, great grandfather, had this dream. It's all about having the priesthood power to seal. I mean, I don't think the church was organized, this is my own opinion, to fill the earth before Christ came. We were organized to have temples set up so that the earth would not be destroyed at the Lord's coming. Because those people that we're doing the work for, those are the ones that will be. I don't believe you can be resurrected until you've had your temple work done. So when Christ comes, be lots and lots of people resurrected, the people that have had their temple work done. So I think We need to tell people that there are 12 tribes of Israel. We're the Levites. We're the one that has the priesthood authority and have revelation. But I used to give those same discussions, and we use Ephesians 4:11-14, which talks about the organization of the church and the purpose of apostles and prophets.
Said that the Bible, of course, chronicles in history a relationship with God, but the Book of Mormon is different in that it shows you how to see the face of Christ. Every single one of the prophets had that experience and what it takes in your heart to do that.
Okay, well, I would just like to finish what I have to say here that I know. Well, I just want to say that I know without a doubt that Christ is my Savior, that He died for all of us, and that through His apostles and prophets, we can partake of His goodness if we will endure to the end and be faithful in all things to the best of our ability. And I say this in Jesus' name, amen. Well, I'm going to put some of these books out that I've done over here. So I do have another website called preservationbooks.com. So I help people design, paginate, and get their family histories published. You can see some of the things I've done. Thank you for putting up with me.